Day 6, the fifth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eugene Smith. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 6, the fifth story. Messer Forese de Rabatta and Master Giotto, the painter, journeying together from Mugello, deride one another's scurvy appearance.
Nay, Phila being silent, and the ladies having made very merry over Ch66's retort, Pamphilo at the Queen's command thus spoke.
Dearest ladies, if fortune, as Pampanea has shown us, does sometimes hide treasures most rich of native worth in the obscurity of base occupations, so, in like manner, 'tis not seldom found that nature has enshrined prodigies of wit in the most ignoble of human forms. Whereof a notable example is afforded by two of our citizens, of whom I purposed for a brief while to discourse. The one, Messer Forese da Rabatta by name, was short and deformed of person, and withal flat-cheeked and flat-nosed, insomuch that never a baroncio had a visage so misshapen, but his would have showed as hideous beside it. Yet so conversant was this man with the laws, that by not a few of those well able to form an opinion, he was reputed a veritable storehouse of civil jurisprudence. The other, whose name was Giotto, was of so excellent a wit that, let nature, mother of all, operant ever by continual revolution of the heavens, fashion what she would, he, with his style and pen and pencil, would depict its like on such wise that it showed not as its like, but rather as the thing itself, insomuch that the visual sense of men did often err in regard thereof, mistaking for real that which was but painted. Wherefore, having brought back to light that art which had for many ages lain buried beneath the blunders of those who painted rather to delight the eyes of the ignorant than to satisfy the intelligence of the wise, he may deservedly be called one of the lights that composed the glory of Florence, and the more so, the more lowly was the spirit in which he won that glory, who, albeit he was, while he yet lived, the master of others, yet did ever refuse to be called their master. And this title that he rejected adorned him with a lustre the more splendid in proportion to the avidity with which it was usurped by those who were less knowing than he, or were his pupils. But for all the exceeding greatness of his art, yet in no particular had he the advantage of Messer Forese, either in form or in feature. But to come to the story. 'Twas in Mugello that Messer Forese, as likewise Giotto, had his country seat, whence, returning from a sojourn that he had made there during the summer vacation of the courts, and being, as it chanced, mounted on a poor jade of a draught horse, he fell in with the said Giotto, who was also on his way back to Florence, after a like sojourn on his own estate, and was neither better mounted, nor in any other wise better equipped, than Messer Forese. And so, being both old men, they jogged on together at a slow pace, and being surprised by a sudden shower, such as we frequently see fall in summer, they presently sought shelter in the house of a husbandman that was known to each of them, and was their friend. But after a while, as the rain gave no sign of ceasing, and they had a mind to be at Florence that same day, they borrowed of the husbandman 2 old cloaks of Romagnole cloth, and 2 hats, much the worse for age, there being no better to be had, and resumed their journey. Whereon they had not proceeded far, when, taking note that they were soaked through and through, and liberally splashed with the mud cast up by their nags' hoofs, circumstances which are not of a kind to add to one's dignity, they, after a long silence, the sky beginning to brighten a little, began to converse, and Messer Forese, as he rode and hearkened to Giotto, who was an excellent talker, surveyed him sideways, and from head to foot, and all over, and seeing him at all points in so sorry and scurvy a trim, and recking naught of his own appearance, broke into a laugh, and said, "Giotto, would e'er a stranger that met us, and had not seen thee before, believe, think'st thou, that thou wert, as thou art, the greatest painter in the world?" Whereto Giotto answered promptly, "Methinks, sir, he might, if, scanning you, he gave you credit for knowing the ABC." Which hearing, Messer Forese recognized his error, and perceived that he had gotten as good as he brought. End of Day 6, the 5th story.
Day 6, the 6th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gesine. The Decameron, by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 6, the 6th story. Michele Scalza proves to certain young men that the Baronci are the best gentlemen in the world and the Maremma, and wins a supper.
The ladies were still laughing over Giotto's ready retort, when the queen charged Fiammetta to follow suit, wherefore thus Fiammetta began.
Pamphilus' mention of the Baronci, who to you, damsels, are perchance not so well known as to him, has brought to my mind a story in which 'tis shown how great is their nobility, and for that it devolves no deviation from our rule of discourse, I am minded to tell it you. 'Tis no long time since there dwelt in our city a young man, Michele Scalza by name, the pleasantest and merriest fellow in the world, and the best furnished with quaint stories, for which reason the Florentine youth set great store in having him with them when they foregathered in company. Now it so befell that one day, he being with a party of them at Montughi, they fell a disputing together on this wise, to wit, who were the best gentlemen and of the longest descent in Florence. One said the Uberti, another the Lamberti, or some other family, according to the predilection of the speaker. Whereat Scalza began to smile, and said, "Now out upon you, blockheads that ye are, ye know not what ye say. The best gentleman and of longest descent in all the world and the Maremma, let alone Florence, are the Baronci by the common consent of all philosophers and all that know them as I do. And lest ye should otherwise conceive me, I say that 'tis of your neighbours the Baronci of Santa Maria Maggiore that I speak." Whereupon the young men, who had looked for somewhat else from him, said derisively, "Thou dost but jest with us, as if we did not know the Baronci as well as thou." Quoth Scalza, "By the Gospels I jest not, but speak sooth, and if there is any of you will wager a supper to be given to the winner and 6 good fellows whom he shall choose, I will gladly do the like, and, what is more, I will abide by the decision of such one of you as you may choose." Then said one of them, whose name was Neri Mannini, "I am ready to adventure this supper," and so they agreed together that Piero di Fiorentino, in whose house they were, should be judge, and hied them to him, followed by all the rest, eager to see Scalza lose, and triumph in his discomfiture, and told Piero all that had been said. Piero, who was a young man of sound sense, heard what Neri had to say, and then turning to Scalza, "And how," quoth he, "mayst thou make good what thou averest?" "I will demonstrate it," returned Scalza, "by reasoning so cogent that not only you, but he that denies it, shall acknowledge that I say sooth. You know, and so they were saying but now, that the longer men's descent, the better is their gentility, and I say that the Baronci are of longer descent, and thus better gentlemen than any other men. If, then, I prove to you that they are of longer descent than any other men, without a doubt the victory in this dispute will rest with me. Now you must know that when God made the Baronci, he was but a novice in his art, of which, when he made the rest of mankind, he was already master. And to assure yourself that herein I say sooth, you have but to consider the Baronci, how they differ from the rest of mankind, who all have faces well composed and duly proportioned, whereas of the Baronci you will see one with a face very long and narrow, another with a face inordinately broad, one with a very long nose, another with a short one with a protruding and upturned chin and great jaws like an ass's, and again there will be one that has one eye larger than its fellow, or set on a lower plane, so that their faces resemble those that children make when they begin to learn to draw. Whereby, as I said, 'tis plainly manifest that when God made them, he was but novice in his art, and so they are of longer descent than the rest of mankind, and by consequence better gentlemen. By which entertaining argument Piero the judge, and Neri, who had wagered the supper, and all the rest, calling to mind the Baronci's ugliness, were so tickled that they fell a-laughing, and averred that Scalza was in the right, and that he had won the wager, and that without a doubt the Baronci were the best gentlemen, and of the longest descent, not merely in Florence, but in the world and the Maremma to boot. Wherefore it was not without reason that Pamphilo, being minded to declare Messer Forese's ill-favouredness, said that he would have been hideous beside a Baroncio. End of Day 6, the 6th story.
Day 6, the 7th story of the Decameron. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 6, the 7th story. Madonna Philippa, being found by her husband with her lover, is cited before the court, and by a ready and jocund answer acquits herself, and brings about an alteration of the statute.
Fiammetta had been silent some time, but Scalza's novel argument to prove the preeminent nobility of the Baronci kept all still laughing, when the queen called for a story from Philostrato, who thus began:
Noble ladies, an excellent thing is apt speech on all occasions, but to be proficient therein I deem then most excellent when the occasion does most imperatively demand it, as was the case with the gentlewoman, of whom I propose to speak to you, who not only ministered gaiety and merriment to her heroes, but extricated herself, as you saw here, from the toils of an ignominious death. There was aforetime in the city of Prato a statute, no less censurable than harsh, which, making no distinction between the wife whom her husband took in adultery with her lover, and the woman found pleasuring a stranger for money, condemned both alike to be burned. While this statute was in force, it befell that a gentlewoman, fair and beyond measure enamoured, Madonna Philippa by name, was by her husband, Rinaldo de Pugliese, found in her own chamber one night in the arms of Lazzarino de Guazzagliotri, a handsome young noble of the same city, whom she loved even as herself. Whereat Rinaldo, very wroth, scarce refrained from falling upon them and killing them on the spot, and indeed, but that he doubted how he should afterwards fare himself, he had given way to the vehemence of his anger, and so done. Nor, though he so far mastered himself, could he forbear recourse to the statute, thereby to compass that he might not otherwise lawfully compass, to wit, the death of his lady. Wherefore, having all the evidence needful to prove her guilt, he took no further counsel, but as soon as 'twas day, he charged the lady, and had her summoned. Like most ladies that are veritably enamoured, the lady was of high courage, and though not a few of her friends and kinfolk sought to dissuade her, she resolved to appear to the summons, having liefer die bravely, confessing the truth, than basely free, and for defiance of the law live in exile, and show herself unworthy of such a lover as had in her arms that night. And so, attended by many ladies and gentlemen, who all exhorted her to deny the charge, she came before the podesta, and with a composed air and unfaltering voice asked whereof he would interrogate her. The podesta, surveying her, and taking note of her extraordinary beauty and exquisite manners, and the high courage that her words evinced, was touched with compassion for her, fearing that she might make some admission, by reason whereof, to save his honor, he must needs do her to death. But still, as he could not refrain from examining her of which was laid to her charge, he said, "Madam, here, as you see, is your husband Rinaldo, who prefers a charge against you, alleging that he has taken you in adultery, and so he demands that, pursuant to a statute which is in force here, I punish you with death. But this I may not do, except you confess. Wherefore be very careful what you answer, and tell me if what your husband alleges against you be true." The lady, nowise dismayed, and in a tone not a little jocund, thus made answer: "True it is, sir, that Rinaldo is my husband, and that last night he found me in the arms of Lazarino, in whose arms for the wholehearted love that I bear him I have oftentimes laid. Nor shall I ever deny, but as well I wot you know, the laws ought to be common and enacted with the common consent of all they affect, which conditions are wanting to this law, insomuch as it binds only us poor women, in whom to be liberal is much less reprehensible than it were in men, and therefore the consent of no woman was, I say not had, but so much as asked before 'twas made, for which reasons it justly deserves to be called a bad law. However, if in scathe of my body and your own soul you are minded to put it to force, 'tis your own affair, but I pray you, go not on to try this matter in any wise, until you have granted me this trifling grace, to wit, to ask my husband if I ever gainsayed him, and did not rather accord him, when and so often he crave it, complete enjoyment of myself." Whereto Rinaldo, having awaited the podesta's question, forthwith answered that assuredly the lady had granted him all that he had asked of her for his gratification. "Then," promptly continued the lady, "if he has ever had of me as much as sufficed for his solace, what was I or am I to do with the surplus? Am I to cast it to the dogs? Is it not better to bestow it on a gentleman that loves me more dearly than himself, than to suffer it to come to naught, or worse?" Which jocund question being heard by well nigh all the folk of Prato, who had flocked thither all agog to see a dame so fair and of such quality on her trial for such an offence, they laughed loud and long, and then all with one accord, and as with one voice, exclaimed that the lady was in the right, and said well. Nor left they the court until, in concert with the podesta, they had so altered the harsh statute as thenceforth only such women as should wrong their husbands for money should be within its purview. Wherefore Rinaldo left the court, discomfited of his foolish enterprise, and the lady, blithe and free, as if rendered back to life from the burning, went home triumphant. End of Day 6, the 7th story.
Day 6, the 8th story of the Decameron. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 6, the 8th story. Fresco admonishes his niece not to look at herself in the glass if 'tis, as she says, grievous to her to see nasty folk.
It was not at first without some flutterings of shame, evinced by the modest blush mantling on their cheeks, that the ladies heard Philostratos' story, but afterwards, exchanging glances, they could scarce forbear to laugh, and hearkened tittering. However, when he had done, the queen turning to Emilia bade her follow suit. Whereupon Emilia, fetching a deep breath, as if she were roused from sleep, thus began.
Loving ladies, brooding thought has kept my spirit for so long time remote from here, that perchance I may make a shift to satisfy our queen with a much shorter story than would have been forthcoming but for my absence of mind, wherein I propose to tell you how a young woman's folly was corrected by her uncle with a pleasant jest, had she but had the sense to apprehend it. My story, then, is of one, Fresco da Celatico by name, that had a niece, Cesca, as she was playfully called, who, being fair of face and person, albeit she had none of those angelical charms that we ofttimes see, had so superlative a conceit of herself, that she had contracted a habit of disparaging both men and women, and all that she saw, entirely regardless of her own defects, though for odiousness, tiresomeness, and petulance she had not her match among women, insomuch that there was naught that could be done to her mind. Besides which, such was her pride, that had she been of the blood royal of France, 'twould have been inordinate. And when she walked abroad, so fastidious was her humour, that she was ever averting her head, as if there was never a soul she saw or met but reeked with a foul smell. Now one day, not to speak of other odious and tiresome ways that she had, it so befell that being come home, where Fresco was, she sat herself down beside him with a most languishing air, and did naught but fume and chafe. Whereupon, "Cesca," quoth he, "what means this, that, though 'tis a feast day, yet thou art come back so soon?" She, all but dissolved with her vapourish humours, made answer, "Why, the truth is, that I am come back early, because never, I believe, were there such odious and tiresome men and women in this city as there are to-day. I cannot pass a soul in the street that I loathe not like ill luck, and I believe there is not a woman in the world that is so distressed by the sight of odious people as I am, and so I am come home thus soon to avoid the sight of them." Whereupon Fresco, to whom his niece's bad manners were distasteful in the extreme, "Daughter," quoth he, "if thou loathe odious folk as much as thou sayest, thou wert best, so thou wouldst live happy, never to look at thyself in the glass." But she, empty as a reed, albeit in her own conceit a match for Solomon in wisdom, was as far as any sheep from apprehending the true sense of her uncle's jest, but answered that on the contrary she was minded to look at herself in the glass like other women. And so she remained, and yet remains, hide-bound in her folly. End of Day 6, the 8th story.
Day 6, the 9th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 6, the 9th story. Guido Cavalcanti, by a quip, neatly rebukes certain Florentine gentlemen who had taken him at a disadvantage.
The queen, perceiving that Emily had finished her story, and that none but she, and he who had the privilege of speaking last, now remained to tell, began on this wise.
Albeit debonair, my ladies, you have forestalled me today of more than two of the stories, of which I had thought to tell one, yet one is still left me to recount, which carries at the close of it a quip of such a sort that perhaps we have as yet heard not so pregnant. You are to know then that in former times there obtained in our city customs excellent and commendable not a few, whereof today not one is left to us, thanks to the greed which, growing with the wealth of our folk, has banished them all from among us. One of which customs was that in divers quarters of Florence the gentlemen that there resided would assemble together in companies of a limited number, taking care to include therein only such as might conveniently bear the expenses, and today one, another tomorrow, each in his turn for a day, would entertain the rest of the company, and so they would not seldom do honour to gentlemen from distant parts when they visited the city, and also to their fellow citizens, and in like manner they would meet together at least once a year, all in the same trim, and on the most notable days would ride together through the city, and now and again they would tilt together, more especially on the greater feasts, or when the city was rejoiced by tidings of victory or some other glad event. Among which companies was one of which Messer Betto Brunelleschi was the leading spirit, into which Messer Betto and his comrades had striven hard to bring Guido, son of Cavalcante de Cavalcanti, and not without reason, inasmuch as, beside being one of the best logicians in the world, and an excellent natural philosopher, qualities of which the company made no great account, he was without a peer for gallantry and courtesy, and excellence of discourse, and aptitude for all manners which he might set his mind to, and that belonged to a gentleman. And therewithal he was very rich, and when he deemed any worthy of honour, knew how to bestow it to the uttermost. But as Messer Betto had never been able to gain him over, he and his comrades supposed that 'twas because Guido, being addicted to speculation, was thereby estranged from men, and for that he was somewhat inclined to the opinion of the Epicureans. The vulgar averred that these speculations of his had no other scope than to prove that God did not exist. Now one day it so befell that, Guido being come, as was not seldom his wont, from Or San Michele by the Corso degli Adimari as far as San Giovanni, around which were then the great tombs of marble that are today in Santa Reparata, besides other tombs not a few, and Guido being between the columns of porphyry that are there and the tombs and the door of San Giovanni, which was locked, Messer Betto and his company came riding on to the piazza of Santa Reparata, and seeing him among the tombs, said, "Go we and flout him." So they set spurs to their horses, and making a mock onset were upon him almost before he saw them. Whereupon, "Guido," they began, "thou wilt be none of our company, but, lo now, when thou hast proved that God does not exist, what wilt thou have achieved?" Guido, seeing that he was surrounded, presently answered, "Gentlemen, you may say to me what you please in your own house." Thereupon he laid his hand on one of the great tombs, and being very nimble, vaulted over it, and so evaded them, and went his way, while they remained gazing in one another's faces, and some said that he had taken leave of his wits, and that his answer was but naught, seeing that the ground on which they stood was common to them with the rest of the citizens, and among them Guido himself. But Messer Betto, turning to them, "Nay, but," quoth he, "'tis ye that have taken leave of your wits, if ye have not understood him, for meetly and in few words he has given us never so shrewd a reprimand, seeing that if you consider it well, these tombs are the houses of the dead that are laid and tarry therein, which he calls our house, to show us that we and all other simple unlettered men are, in comparison of him and the rest of the learned, in sorrier case than dead men, and so being here we are in our own house." Then none was there but understood Guido's meaning, and was abashed, insomuch that they flouted him no more, and thenceforth reputed Messer Betto a gentleman of a subtle and discerning wit. End of Day 6, the 9th story.
Day 6, the 10th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information, or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Reading by Andy Minter. The Decameron, by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 6, the 10th story. Fra Cipolo promises to show certain country folk a feather of the angel Gabriel, in lieu of which he finds coals, which he avers to be those with which St. Lawrence was roasted.
All the company, save Dioneo, being delivered of their several stories, he wist that it was his turn to speak; wherefore, without awaiting any very express command, he enjoined silence on those that were commending Guido's pithy quip, and thus began:
Sweet my ladies, albeit 'tis my privilege to speak of what likes me most, I purpose not today to deviate from that theme whereon you have all discoursed most appositely, but, following in your footsteps, I am minded to show you with what adroitness and readiness of resource one of the friars of St. Anthony avoided a pickle that two young men had in readiness for him. Nor, if in order to do the story full justice I be somewhat prolix of speech, should it be burdensome to you, if you will but glance at the sun, which is yet in mid-heaven. Certaldo, as perchance you may have heard, is a town of Valdezza within our countryside, which, small though it is, had in it aforetime people of rank and wealth. Thither, for that there he found good pasture, 'twas long the wont of one of the friars of St. Anthony to resort once every year, to collect the alms that fools gave him. Fra Cipolo, so hight the friar, met with a hearty welcome, no less perchance by reason of his name than for other cause, the onions produced in that district being famous throughout Tuscany. He was little of person, red-haired, jolly-visaged, and the very best of good fellows; and therewithal, though learning he had none, he was so excellent and ready a speaker, that whoso knew him not would not only have esteemed him a great rhetorician, but would have pronounced him Tully himself, or perchance Quintilian, and in all the countryside there was scarce a soul to whom he was not either gossip, or friend, or lover. Being thus wont from time to time to visit Certaldo, the friar came there once upon a time in the month of August, and on a Sunday morning, all the good folk of the neighbouring farms being come to mass in the parish church, he took occasion to come forward and say, Ladies and gentlemen, you wot 'tis your custom to send year by year to the poor of Baron Master St. Anthony somewhat of your wheat and oats, more or less according to the ability and devoutness of each, that blessed St. Anthony may save your oxen and asses and pigs and sheep from harm. And you are also accustomed, and especially those whose names are on the books of our confraternity, to pay your trifling annual dues, to collect which offerings I am hither sent by my superior, to wit, Master Abbot, wherefore, with the blessing of God, after noon, when you hear the bells ring, you will come out of the church to the place where, in the usual way, I shall deliver you my sermon, and you will kiss the cross. And therewithal, knowing as I do that you are one and all most devoted to Baron Master St. Anthony, I will, by way of especial grace, show you a most holy and goodly relic, which I brought myself from the Holy Land overseas, which is none other than one of the feathers of the angel Gabriel, which he left behind him in the room of the Virgin Mary, when he came to make her the Annunciation in Nazareth. And having said thus much, he ceased, and went on with the mass. Now, among the many that were in the church, while Fra Cipolo made this speech, were two very wily young wags, the one Giovanni del Bragioniere by name, and the other Biagio Pizzini, who, although they were on the best of terms with Fra Cipolo, and much in his company, had a sly laugh together over the relic, and resolved to make game of him and his feather. So, having learnt that Fra Cipolo was to breakfast that morning in the town with one of his friends, as soon as they knew that he was at table, down they hied them into the street, and to the inn where the friar lodged, having complotted that Biagio should keep the friar's servant in play, while Giovanni made search among the friar's goods and chattels for this feather, whatever it might be, to carry it off, that they might see how the friar would afterwards explain the matter to the people. Now, Fra Cipolo had for servant one Guccio, whom some called by way of addition Balena, others Imbrata, others again Porco, and who was such a rascallion that sure it is that Lippo Topo himself never painted his like. Concerning whom Fra Cipolo would ofttimes make merry with his familiars, saying, My servant has 9 qualities, any one of which in Solomon, Aristotle, or Seneca would have been enough to spoil all their virtue, wisdom, and holiness. Consider, then, what sort of man he must be that has these 9 qualities, and yet never a mark of either virtue, or wisdom, or holiness. And being asked upon divers occasions what these 9 qualities might be, he strung them together in rhyme, and answered, I will tell you, lazy, uncleanly, and a liar he is, negligent, disobedient, and foul-mouthed, I wis, and reckless, and witless, and mannerless. And therewithal he has some other petty vices, which were best to pass over. And the most amusing thing about him is that wherever he goes he is for taking a wife and renting a house, and on the strength of a big, black, greasy beard, he deems himself so very handsome a fellow, and seductive, that he takes all the women that see him to be in love with him, and if he were left alone he would slip his girdle and run after them all. True it is that he is of great use to me, for that, be any minded to speak with me never so secretly, he must still have his share of the audience, and if perchance aught is demanded of me, such is his fear lest I should be at a loss what answer to make, that he presently replies, aye or no, as he deems meet. Now, when he left this knave at the inn, Fra Cipolla had strictly enjoined him on no account to suffer any one to touch aught of his, and least of all his wallet, because it contained the holy things. But Guccio Imbrata, who was fonder of the kitchen than any nightingale of the green boughs, and most particular if he espied there a maid, and in the host kitchen had caught sight of a coarse fat woman, short and misshapen, with a pair of breasts that showed as 2 buckets of muck, and a face that might have belonged to one of the Baronci, all reeking with sweat and grease and smoke, left Fra Cipolla's room and all his things to take care of themselves, and like a vulture swooping down upon the carrion, was in the kitchen in a trice, where, though 'twas August, he sat him down by the fire, and fell a gossiping with Nuta, such was the maid's name, and told her that he was a gentleman by procuration, and had more florins than could be reckoned, besides those that he had to give away, which were rather more than less, and that he could do and say such things as never were or might be seen or heard for ever, Lord and a day, and all heedless of his cowl, which had as much grease upon it as would have furnished forth the cauldron of Altopascio, and of his rent and patched doublet, inlaid with filth about the neck and under the armpits, and so stained that it showed hues more various than did ever silk from Tartary or the Indies, and of his shoes that were all to pieces, and of his hose that were all in tatters. He told her, in a tone that would have become Sieur de Chatillon, that he was minded to rehabit her, and put her in trim, and raise her from her abject condition, and place her where, though she would not have much to call her own, at any rate she would have hope of better things, and with much more to the like effect. Which professions, though made with every appearance of good will, proved, like most of his schemes, insubstantial as air, and came to nothing. Finding Guccio Porco thus occupied with Nuta, the 2 young men gleefully accounted their work half done, and none gainsaying them, entered Fra Cipolla's room, which was open, and lit at once upon the wallet, in which was the feather. The wallet opened, they found, wrapped up in many folds of taffeta, a little casket, on opening which they discovered one of the tail feathers of a parrot, which they deemed must be that which the friar had promised to show the good folk of Certaldo. And in sooth he might well have so imposed upon them, for in those days the luxuries of Egypt had scarce been introduced into Tuscany, though they have since been brought over in prodigious abundance, to the grave hurt of all Italy. And though some conversance with them there was, yet in those parts folk knew next to nothing of them, but adhering to the honest simple ways of their forefathers, had not seen, nay for the most part had not so much as heard tell of a parrot. So the young men, having found the feather, took it out with great glee, and looking around for something to replace it, they espied in a corner of the room some pieces of coal, wherewith they filled the casket, which they then closed, and having set the room in order exactly as they had found it, they quitted it unperceived, and hied them merrily off with the feather, and posted themselves where they might hear what Fra Cipolla would say when he found the coals in its stead. Mass said, the simple folk that were in the church went home with the tidings that the feather of the angel Gabriel was to be seen after noon, and this good man telling his neighbour, and that good wife her gossip, By the time every one had breakfasted, the town could scarce hold the multitude of men and women that flocked thither all agog to see this feather. Fra Cipolla, having made a hearty breakfast and had a little nap, got up shortly after noon, and marking the great concourse of country folk that were come to see the feather, sent word to Guccio Imbrata to go up there with the bells and bring him the wallet. Guccio, though it was with difficulty that he tore himself away from the kitchen and Nuta, hied him up with the things required, and though when he got up he was winded, for he was corpulent with drinking naught but water, he did Fra Cipolla's bidding by going to the church door and ringing the bells amain. When all the people were gathered about the door, Fra Cipolla, all unwitting that aught of his was missing, began his sermon, and after much said in glorification of himself, caused the Confiator to be recited with great solemnity, and 2 torches to be lit by way of preliminary to the showing of the feather of the angel Gabriel. He then bared his head, carefully unfolded the taffeta, and took out the casket, which, after a few prefatory words in praise and laudation of the angel Gabriel and his relic, he opened. When he saw that it contained naught but coals, he did not suspect Guccio Balaena of playing the trick, for he knew that he was not clever enough, nor did he curse him that his carelessness had allowed another to play it, but he only imprecated himself that he had committed his things to the keeping of one whom he knew to be negligent and disobedient, reckless and witless. Nevertheless, he changed not colour, but with face and hands upturned to heaven, he said, in a voice that all might hear, O God, blessed be thy might for ever and ever. Then, closing the casket and turning to the people, Ladies and gentlemen, he said, you ought to know that when I was yet a very young man, I was sent by my superior into those parts where the sun rises, and I was expressly bidden to search until I should find the privileges of porcellana, which, though they cost nothing to seal, are of much more use to others than to us. On which errand I set forth, taking my departure from Venice, and traversing the Borgo di Greci, and thence on horseback the realm of the Algarve, and so by Baldaccia I came to Parione, whence, somewhat athirst, I after a while got on to Sardinia. But wherefore go I about to enumerate all the lands in which I pursued my quest? Having passed the Straits of San Giorgio, I arrived at Trufia and Bufia, countries thickly populated and with great nations, whence I pursued my journey to Menzogna, where I met with many of our own brethren, and of other religious not a few, intent, one and all, on eschewing hardship for the love of God, making little account of others' toil, so that they might ensue their own advantage, and paying in naught but unminted coin throughout the length and breadth of the country. And so I came to the land of the Abruzzi, where the men and women go in pattens on the mountains, and clothe the hogs with their own entrails. And a little further on I found folk that carried bread in staves and wine in sacks. And leaving them, I arrived at the mountains of the Bacci, where all the waters run downwards. In short, I penetrated so far that I came at last to India Pastinaccia, where I swear to you by the habit that I wear, that I saw pruning hooks fly, a thing that none would believe that had not seen it. Whereof be my witness that I lie not, Maso d'Asagio, that great merchant, whom I found there cracking nuts and selling the shells by retail. However, not being able to find that whereof I was in quest, because from thence one must travel by water, I turned back, and so came at length to the Holy Land, where in summer cold bread costs 4 deniers, and hot bread is to be had for nothing. And there I found the venerable father, Non mi blasmet se voi piace, the most worshipful patriarch of Jerusalem, who, out of respect for the habit that I have ever worn, to wit, that of Baron Master St. Anthony, was pleased to let me see all the holy relics that he had by him, which were so many that were I to enumerate them all I should not come to the end of them in some miles. However, not to disappoint you, I will tell you a few of them. In the first place, then, he showed me the finger of the Holy Spirit, as whole and entire as it ever was, and the tuft of the seraph that appeared to St. Francis, and one of the nails of the cherubim, and one of the ribs of the verbum cario, hie thee to the casement, and some of the vestments of the Holy Catholic faith, and some of the rays of the star that appeared to the Magi in the east, and a phial of the sweat of St. Michael, a battling with the devil, and the jaws of death of St. Lazarus, and other relics. And for that I gave him a liberal supply of the acclivities of Monte Morello in the Vulgar, and some chapters of the Caprezio, of which he had long been in quest, he was pleased to let me participate in his holy relics, and gave me one of the teeth of the Holy Cross, and in a small phial a bit of the sound of the bells of Solomon's temple, and this feather of the angel Gabriel, whereof I have told you, and one of the patterns of San Gerardo de Villamagna, which not long ago I gave at Florence to Gerardo de Monsi, who holds him in prodigious veneration. He also gave me some of the coals with which the most blessed martyr St. Lawrence was roasted, all which things I devoutly brought thence, and have them all safe. True it is that my superior hath not hitherto permitted me to show them, until he should be certified that they are genuine. However, now that this is avouched by certain miracles wrought by them, of which we have tidings by letter from the Patriarch, he has given me leave to show them. But, fearing to trust them to another, I always carry them with me, and, to tell you the truth, I carry the feather of the angel Gabriel, lest it should get spoiled, in a casket, and the coals with which St. Lawrence was roasted in another casket, which caskets are so like the one to the other that not seldom I mistake one for the other, which has befallen me on this occasion. For whereas I thought to have brought with me the casket wherein is the feather, I have brought instead that which contains the coals. Nor deem I this a mischance. Nay, methinks 'tis by the interposition of God, and that he himself put the casket of coals in my hand. For I mind me that the feast of St. Lawrence falls but 2 days hence. Wherefore God, being minded that by showing you the coals with which he was roasted, I should rekindle in your souls the devotion that you ought to feel towards him, guided my hand not to the feather which I meant to take, but to the blessed coals that were extinguished by the humours that exuded from that most holy body. And so, blessed children, bear your heads, and devoutly draw nigh to see them. But first of all I would have you know, that whoso has the sign of the cross made upon him with these coals may live secure for the whole of the ensuing year, that fire shall not touch him, that he feel it not. Having so said, the friar, chanting a hymn in praise of St. Lawrence, opened the casket and showed the coals. Whereon the foolish crowd gazed a while in awe and reverent wonder, and then came pressing forward in a mighty throng about Fra Cipolla with offerings beyond their wont, each and all praying him to touch them with the coals. Wherefore Fra Cipolla took the coals in his hand, and set about making on their white blouses, and on their doublets, and on the veils of the women, crosses as big as might be, averring the while that whatever the coals might thus lose would be made good to them again in the casket, as he had often proved. On this wise, to his exceeding great profit, he marked all the folk of Certaldo with the cross, and, thanks to his ready wit and resource, had his laugh at those who, by robbing him of the feather, thought to make a laughing stock of him. They, indeed, being among his hearers, and marking his novel expedient, and how voluble he was, and what a long story he made of it, laughed till they thought their jaws would break. And when the congregation was dispersed, they went up to him, and never so merrily told him what they had done, and returned him his feather, which next year proved to be no less lucrative to him than that day the coals had been. End of Day 6, the 10th story.
Day the 6th, the conclusion of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by H. M. Rigg. Day the 6th, the conclusion. Immense was the delight and diversion which this story afforded to all the company alike, and great and general was the laughter over Fra Cipolla, and more especially at his pilgrimage, and the relics, as well those that he had but seen as those that he had brought back with him. Which being ended, the queen, taking note that therewith the close of their sovereignty was come, stood up, took off the crown, and set it on Dioneo's head, saying with a laugh, "'Tis time, Dioneo, that thou prove the weight of the burden of having ladies to govern and guide. Be thou king then, and let thy rule be such, that when 'tis ended, we may have cause to commend it." Dioneo took the crown, and laughingly answered, "Kings worthier far than I you may well have seen many a time ere now. I speak of the kings in chess. But let me have of you that obedience which is due to a true king, and of a surety I will give you to taste of that solace, without which perfection of joy there may not be in any festivity. But enough on this. I will govern as best I may." Then, as was the wont, he sent for the seneschal, and gave him particular instruction how to order matters during the term of his sovereignty, which done, he said, "Noble ladies, such and so diverse has been our discourse of the ways of men and their various fortunes, that but for the visit that we had a while ago from Madame Lekiska, who by what she said has furnished me with matter of discourse for tomorrow, I doubt I had been not a little put to it to find a theme. You heard how she said that there was not a woman in her neighborhood whose husband had her virginity, adding that well she knew how many and what manner of tricks they, after marriage, played their husbands. The first count we may well leave to the girls whom it concerns. The second, methinks, should prove a diverting topic. Wherefore I ordain that, taking our cue from Madame Lekiska, we discourse tomorrow of the tricks that either for love or for their deliverance from peril ladies have heretofore played their husbands, and whether they were by the said husbands detected or no. To discourse of such a topic, some of the ladies deemed unmeet for them, and besought the king to find another theme. But the king made answer, "Ladies, what manner of theme I have prescribed I know as well as you, nor was I to be diverted from prescribing it by that which you now think to declare unto me. For I wot the times are such that so only men and women have a care to do naught that is unseemly, 'tis allowable to them to discourse of what they please. For in sooth, as you must know, so out of joint are the times that the judges have deserted the judgment seat, the laws are silent, and ample license to preserve his life as best he may is accorded to each and all. Wherefore, if you are somewhat less strict of speech than is your wont, not that aught unseemly in act may follow, but that you may afford solace to yourselves and others, I see not how you can be open to reasonable censure on the part of any. Furthermore, naught that has been said from the first day to the present moment has, methinks, in any degree sullied the immaculate honour of your company, nor, God helping us, shall aught ever sully it. Besides, who is there that knows not the quality of your honour, which were proof, I make no doubt, against not only the seductive influence of diverting discourse, but even the terror of death? And to tell you the truth, whoso wist that you refused to discourse of these like matters for a while, would be apt to suspect that it was but for that you had yourselves erred in like sort. And truly a goodly honour would you confer upon me, obedient as I have ever been to you, if after making me your king and your lawgiver, you were to refuse to discourse of the theme which I prescribe. Away then with the scruple fitter for low minds than yours, and let each study how she may give us a goodly story, and fortune prosper her therein." So spake the king, and the ladies, hearkening, said that, even as he would, so it should be. Whereupon he gave all leave to do as they might be severally minded, until the supper hour. The sun was still quite high in the heaven, for they had not enlarged in their discourse. Wherefore Dioneo with the other gallants, being set to play at dice, Elisa called the other ladies apart and said, There is a nook hard by this place, where I think none of you has ever been. 'Tis called the Ladies' Vale, whither, ever since we have been here, I have desired to take you, but time meet I have not found until to-day, when the sun is still so high. If then you are minded to visit it, I have no manner of doubt that, when you are there, you will be very glad you came. The ladies answered that they were ready, and so, saying no to the young men, they summoned one of their maids and set forth. Nor had they gone much more than a mile, when they arrived at the Vale of Ladies. They entered it by a very straight gorge, through which there issued a rivulet, clear as crystal, and a sight than which naught more fair and pleasant, especially at that time when the heat was great, could be imagined, met their eyes. Within the valley, as one of them afterwards told me, was a plain about half a mile in circumference, and so exactly circular that it might have been fashioned according to the compass, though it seemed a work of nature's art, not man's. It was girdled about by 6 hills of no great height, each crowned with a palace that shewed as a goodly little castle. The slopes of the hills were graduated from summit to base, after the manner of the successive tiers, ever abridging their circle, that we see in our theatres, and as many as fronted the southern rays were all planted so close with vines, olives, almond trees, cherry trees, fig trees, and other fruit-bearing trees, not a few, that there was not a hand's breadth of vacant space. Those that fronted the north were in like manner covered with copses of oak saplings, ashes, and other trees, as green and straight as might be. Besides which the plain, which was shut in on all sides, save that on which the ladies had entered, was full of firs, cypresses, and bay trees, with here and there a pine, in order and symmetry so meet and excellent, as had they been planted by an artist, the best that might be found in that kind, wherethrough, even when the sun was in the zenith, scarce a ray of light might reach the ground, which was all one lawn of the finest turf, pranked with the hyacinths and divers other flowers. Add to which, nor was there aught there more delightsome, a rivulet, that issuing from one of the gorges between the 2 hills, descended over ledges of living rock, making, as it fell, a murmur most gratifying to the ear, and seen from a distance, shewed as a spray of finest powdered quicksilver, and no sooner reached the little plain than it was gathered into a tiny channel, by which it sped with great velocity to the middle of the plain, where it formed a diminutive lake, like the fish-ponds that townsfolk sometimes make in their gardens, when they have occasion for them. The lake was not so deep, but that a man might stand therein with his breast above the water, and so clear, so pellucid was the water that the bottom, which was of the finest gravel, shewed so distinct, that one, had he wished, who had naught better to do, might have counted the stones. Nor was it only the bottom that was to be seen, but such a multitude of fishes, glancing to and fro, as was at once delight and a marvel to behold. Bank it had none, but its margin was the lawn, to which it imparted a goodlier freshness. So much of the water as it might not contain was received by another tiny channel, through which, issuing from the vale, it glided swiftly to the plain below. To which pleasaunce the damsels, being come, surveyed it with roving glance, and finding it commendable, and marking the lake in front of them, did, as it was very hot, and they deemed themselves secure from observation, resolve to take a bath. So having bidden their maid wait and keep watch over the access to the vale, and give them warning if haply any should approach it, they all 7 undressed and got into the water, which to the whiteness of their flesh was even such a veil as fine glass is to the vermeil of the rose. They being thus in the water, the clearness of which was thereby in no wise affected, did presently begin to go thither and thither after the fish, which had much ado where to bestow themselves so as to escape out of their hands. In which diversion they spent some time, and caught a few, and then they heaved them out of the water and dressed them again, and bethinking them that it was time to return to the palace, they began slowly sauntering thither, dilating much as they went upon the beauty of the place, albeit they could not extol it more than they had already done. It was still quite early when they reached the palace, so that they found the gallants yet at play where they had left them. To whom quoth Pompinia with a smile, "We have stolen a march upon you to-day." "So," replied Dioneo, "'tis with you do first and say after." "Ay, my lord," returned Pompinia, and told him at large whence they came, and what the place was like, and how far it was off, and what they had done. What she said of the beauty of the spot begat in the king a desire to see it. Therefore he straightway ordered supper, whereof, when all had gaily partaken, the three gallants parted from the ladies, and hied them with their servants to the vale, where none of them had ever been before, and having marked all its beauties, extolled it as scarce to be matched in all the world. Then, as the hour was very late, they did but bathe, and as soon as they had resumed their clothes, returned to the ladies, whom they found dancing a carol to an air that Fiammetta sang. Which done, they conversed of the lady's vale, waxing eloquent in praise thereof, insomuch that the king called the seneschal, and bade him have some beds made ready, and carried thither on the morrow, that any that were so minded might there take their siesta. He then had lights and wine and comfits brought, and when they had taken a slight refection, he bade all address them to the dance. So at his behest Pamphilo led a dance, and then the king, turning with gracious mien to Elisa, "Fair damsel," quoth he, "it was thou to-day didst me this honour of the crown, and it is my will that thine to-night be the honour of the song. Wherefore sing us whatsoever thou hast most lief." "That gladly will I," replied Elisa smiling, and thus with dulcet voice began:
If of thy talents, love, be quit I may, I deem it scarce can be, but other fangs I may elude for aye. Service I took with thee, a tender maid, in thy war thinking perfect peace to find, and all my arms upon the ground I laid, yielding myself to thee with trustful mind. Thou, harpy tyrant, whom no faith may bind, eftsoons didst swoop on me, and with thy cruel claws madest me thy prey. Then thy poor captive, bound with many a chain, thou tookest and gavest to him whom fate did call hither my death to be, for that in pain and bitter tears I waste away this thrall. Nor have I ever sigh or tear let fall, so harsh a lord is he that him inclines a jot my grief to allay. My prayers upon the idle air are spent, he hears not, will not hear, wherefore in vain the more each hour my soul doth her torment. Nor may I die, albeit to die were gain. Ah, Lord, have pity of my bitter pain. Help have I none but thee, then take and bind, and at my feet him lay. But if thou wilt not, do my soul but loose from hope, that her still binds with triple chain. Sure, O my Lord, this prayer thou wilt not refuse, the which so thou to grant me do but deign, I look my wonted beauty to regain, and banish misery with those roses white and red, bedecked and gay.
So with a most piteous sigh ended Elisa her song, whereat all wondered exceedingly, nor might any conjecture wherefore she so sang. But the king, who was in a jolly humour, sent for Tindaro, and bade him out with his cornemuse, and caused them tread many a measure thereto, until, No small part of the night being thus spent, he gave leave to all to betake them to rest. End of conclusion of Day 6.
Day 7. The Introduction of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by M. Rigg. Day 7. The Introduction. Endeth here the 6th day of the Decameron, beginneth the 7th, in which, under the rule of Dioneo, discourse is had of the tricks which, either for love or for their deliverance from peril, ladies have heretofore played their husbands, and whether they were by the said husbands detected or no. Fled was now each star from the eastern sky, save only that which we call Lucifer, which still glowed in the whitening dawn, when up rose the seneschal, and with a goodly baggage train hied him to the Lady's Vale, there to make all things ready according to the ordinance and the commandment of the king. Nor was it long after his departure that the king rose, being awakened by the stir and bustle that the servants made in lading the horses; and being risen he likewise roused all the ladies and the other gallants. And so, when as yet it was scarce clear daybreak, they all took the road, nor seemed it to them that the nightingales and the other birds had ever chanted so blithely as this morning. By which hour they were attended to the Lady's Vale, where they were greeted by other warblers not a few that seemed rejoiced at their arrival. Roving about the vale, and surveying its beauties afresh, they rated them higher than on the previous day, as indeed the hour was more apt to shew them forth. Then with good wine and comfits they broke their fast, and that they might not lag behind the songsters, they fell a singing, whereto the vale responded, ever echoing their strains, nor did the birds, as minded not to be beaten, fail to swell the chorus with notes of unwonted sweetness. However, breakfast time came, and then the tables being laid under a living canopy of trees, and besides other goodly trees that fringed the little lake, they sat them down in order as to the king seemed meet. So they took their meal, glancing from time to time at the lake, where the fish darted to and fro in multitudinous shoals, which afforded not only delight to their eyes, but matter for converse. Breakfast ended, and the tables removed, they fell a singing again more blithely than before. After which, there being set in divers places about the little vale, beds which the discreet seneschal had duly furnished and equipped, within and without with store of French coverlets, and other bed gear, all that were so minded, had leave of the king to go to sleep; and those that cared not to sleep might betake them, as each might choose, to any of their wonted diversions. But all at length being risen, and the time for addressing them to the story telling being come, the king had carpets spread on the sward no great way from the place where they had breakfasted, and all having set them down beside the lake, he bade Emilia begin, which, blithe and smiling, Emilia did on this wise. End of Introduction of the 7th Day.
Day 7, the first story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 7, the first story. Gianni Letteringhi hears a knocking at his door at night. He awakens his wife, who persuades him that 'tis the bogey, which they fall to exercising with a prayer, whereupon the knocking ceases. My lord, glad indeed had I been that, saving your good pleasure, some other than I had had precedence of discourse upon so goodly a theme as this of which we are to speak. I doubt I am but chosen to teach others confidence, but, such being your will, I will gladly obey it. and my endeavour shall be, dearest ladies, to tell you somewhat that may be serviceable to you in the future. For if you are, as I am, timorous, and that most especially of the bogey, which God wot I know not what manner of thing it may be, nor yet have found any that knew, albeit we are all alike afraid of it, you may learn from this my story how to put it to flight, should it intrude upon you, with a holy, salutary, and most efficacious orison. There dwelt of yore at Florence, in the quarter of San Pancrazio, a master spinner, Gianni Lotharingi by name, one that had prospered in his business, but had little understanding of aught else, insomuch that being somewhat of a simpleton, he had many a time been chosen leader of the band of laud singers of Santa Maria Novella, and had charge of their school, and not a few like offices had he often served, upon which he greatly plumed himself. Howbeit, 'twas all for no other reason than that, being a man of substance, he gave liberal doles to the friars, who, for what they got thereof, this one hose, another a cloak, and a third a hood, would teach him good orisons, or give him the paternoster in the vernacular, or the chant of St. Alexis, or the lament of St. Bernard, or the laud of Lady Matilda, or the like sorry stuff, which he greatly prized, and guarded with jealous care, deeming them all most conducive to the salvation of his soul. Now our simple master spinner had a most beautiful wife, and amorous withal, her name Monatessa. Daughter she was of Manuccio della Coccola, and not a little knowing and keen-witted, and being enamoured of Federigo di Neri Pergolotti, a handsome and lusty gallant, as he also of her, she, knowing her husband's simplicity, took counsel with her maid, and arranged that Federigo should come to chat with her at a right goodly pleasure house that the said Gianni had at Camerata, where she was wont to pass the summer, Gianni coming now and again to sup and sleep, and going back in the morning to his shop, or maybe to his laud singers. Federigo, who desired nothing better, went up there punctually on the appointed day about vespers, and, as the evening passed without Gianni making his appearance, did most comfortably, and to his no small satisfaction, sup and sleep with the lady, who, lying in his arms, taught him that night some 6 of her husband's lauds. But as neither she nor Federigo was minded that this beginning should also be the end of their intercourse, and that it might not be needful for the maid to go each time to make the assignation with him, they came to the following understanding, to wit, that as often as he came and went between the house and an estate that he had a little higher up, he should keep an eye on a vineyard that was beside the house, where he would see an ass's head stuck on one of the poles of the vineyard, and as often as he observed the muzzle turned towards Florence, he might visit her without any sort of misgiving, and if he found not the door open, he was to tap it thrice, and she would open it. And when he saw the muzzle of the ass's head turned towards Fiesole, he was to keep away, for then Gianni would be there. Following which plan, they foregathered not seldom. But on one of these evenings, when Federigo was to sup with Monatessa on 2 fat capons that she had boiled, it so chanced that Gianni arrived there unexpectedly and very late, much to the lady's chagrin. So she had a little salt meat boiled apart, on which she supped with her husband, and the maid by her orders carried the 2 boiled capons, laid in a spotless napkin, with plenty of fresh eggs and a bottle of good wine, into the garden, to which there was access otherwise than from the house, and where she was wont at times to sup with Federigo. And there the maid sat them down at the foot of a peach tree that grew beside a lawn. But in her vexation she forgot to tell the maid to wait till Federigo should come and let him know that Gianni was there, and he must take his supper in the garden. And she and Gianni and the maid were scarce gone to bed when Federigo came and tapped once at the door, which being hard by the bedroom, Gianni heard the tap, as did also the lady, albeit that Gianni might have no reason to suspect her, she feigned to be asleep. Federigo waited a little, and then gave a second tap, whereupon, wondering what it might mean, Gianni nudged his wife, saying, "Tessa, dost thou hear what I hear? Methinks some one has tapped at our door." The lady, who had heard the noise much better than he, feigned to wake up, and "How? What sayst thou?" quoth she. "I say," replied Gianni, "that meseems some one has tapped at our door." "Tapped at it?" quoth the lady. "Alas, my Gianni, wotst thou not what that is? 'Tis the bogey, which for some nights past has so terrified me as never was, insomuch that I never hear it but I pop my head under the clothes and venture not to put it out again until 'tis broad day." "Come, come, wife," quoth Gianni, If such it is, be not alarmed, for before we got into bed I repeated the Ch66, the Intemerata, and divers other good orisons, besides which I made the sign of the cross in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit at each corner of the bed, wherefore we need have no fear that it may avail to hurt us, whatever be its power. The lady, lest Federigo, perchance suspecting our rival, should take offence, resolved to get up and let him understand that Gianni was there, so she said to her husband, "Well, well, so sayest thou, but I for my part shall never deem myself safe and secure unless we exercise it, seeing that thou art here." "Oh," said Gianni, "and how does one exercise it?" "That," quoth the lady, "I know right well, for the other day, when I went to Fiesole for the pardoning, one of those anchoresses, the saintliest creatures, my Gianni, God be my witness, knowing how much afraid I am of the bogey, taught me a holy and salutary orison, which she said she had tried many a time before she was turned anchoress, and always with success. God wot, I should never have had courage to try it alone, but as thou art here, I propose that we go exercise it together." Gianni made answer that he was quite of the same mind, so up they got and stole to the door, on the outside of which Federigo, now suspicious, was still waiting, and as soon as they were there, "Now," quoth the lady to Gianni, "thou wilt spit when I tell thee." "Good," said Gianni, whereupon the lady began her orison, saying, "Bogey, bogey that goes by night, tail erect thou camest, tail erect take thy flight, hie thee to the garden, and the great peach before, grease upon grease, and droppings 50 of my hand shalt thou find, set the flask thy lips to, then away like the wind, and no scath unto me or my Gianni do." And when she had done, "Now, Gianni," quoth she, "spit," and Gianni spat. There was no more room for jealousy in Federigo's mind as he heard all this from without, nay, for all his disappointment, he was like to burst with suppressed laughter, and when Gianni spat, he muttered under his breath, "Now out with thy teeth." The lady, having after this fashion thrice exercised the bogey, went back to bed with her husband. Federigo, disappointed of the supper that he was to have had with her, and apprehending the words of the orison aright, hied him to the garden, and having found the 2 capons and the wine and the eggs at the foot of the peach tree, took them home with him, and supped very comfortably. And many a hearty laugh had he and the lady over the exorcism during their subsequent intercourse. Now, true it is that some say that the lady had in fact turned the ass's head towards Fiesole, but that a husbandman, passing through the vineyard, had given it a blow with his stick, whereby it had swung round, and remained fronting Florence. And so it was that Federigo thought that he was invited, and came to the house, and that the lady's orison was on this wise: "Bogey, a God's name away thee high, for whoever turned the ass's head, 'twas not I. Another it was, foul for his eyne, and here am I with Gianni mine." Wherefore Federigo was fain to take himself off, having neither slept nor supped. But a neighbour of mine, a lady well advanced in years, tells me that, by what she heard when she was a girl, both stories are true, but that the latter concerned not Gianni Lotharinghi, but one Gianni di Nello, that lived at Porta San Piero, and was no less a numbskull than Gianni Lotharinghi. Wherefore, dear my ladies, you are at liberty to choose which exorcism you prefer, or take both, if you like. They are both of extraordinary and approved virtue in such cases, as you've heard. Get them by heart, therefore, and they may yet stand you in good stead. End of Day 7, the first story.
Day 7, the second story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 7, the second story. Her husband returning home, Peronella bestows her lover in a tun, which, being sold by her husband, she avers to have been already sold by herself to one that is inside examining it to be sound. Whereupon the lover jumps out and causes the husband to scour the tun for him, and afterwards to carry it to his house.
Great, indeed, was the laughter with which Emilia's story was received. which being ended, and her orison commended by all as good and salutary, the king bade Philostrato follow suit, and thus Philostrato began.
Dearest my ladies, so much are the tricks that men play you, and most of all your husbands, that, when from time to time it so befalls that some lady plays her husband a trick, the circumstance, whether it come from your own cognizance, or be told you by another, should not only give you joy, but should incite you to publish it on all hands, that men may beware that, knowing as they are, their ladies also, on their part, know somewhat, which cannot be serviceable to you. For that one does not rashly essay to take another with guile, whom one wots not to lack that quality. Can we doubt then that, should but the converse that we hold today touching this matter should be bruited about among men, 'twould serve but a most notable check upon the tricks they play you, by doing them the wit of the tricks, which you, in like manner, have been so minded, may play them? Wherefore 'tis my intention to tell you in what manner a young girl, albeit she was but of low rank, did, on the spur of the moment, beguile her husband to her own deliverance. 'Twas not long time since at Naples a poor man, a mason by craft, took to wife a fair and amorous maiden, Perenella was her name, who eked out by spinning what her husband made by his craft. And so the pair managed as best they might on very slender means. And, as chance would have it, one of the gallants of the city, taking note of this Perenella one day, and being mightily pleased with her, fell in love with her, and by this means and that so prevailed that he won her to accord him her intimacy. Their times of foregathering they concerted as follows, to wit, that, her husband being wont to rise betimes of a morning to go to work or seek for work, the gallant was to be where he might see him go forth, and the street where she dwelt, which was called Avario, being scarcely inhabited, was to come into the house as soon as her husband was well out of it, and so times not a few they did. But one of these occasions it befell that, the good man being gone forth, and Gianello Signario, such was the gallant's name, being come into the house, and being with Perenella, after a while, back came the good man, though 'twas not his wont to return until the day was done, and finding the door locked, he knocked, and after knocking he fell a saying to himself, O God be praised, thy name for ever, for that, albeit thou hast ordained that I be poor, at least thou hast accorded me the consolation of a good and honest girl for wife. Mark what haste she made to shut the door when I was gone, that none else might enter to give her trouble. Now Perenella knew by his knock that 'twas her husband, wherefore, Alas, Gianello mine, quoth she, I am a dead woman, for lo, here is my husband, foul fall him. Come back. What it may import I know not, for he is never wont to come back at this hour. Perchance he caught sight of thee as thou camest in. However, for the love of God, be it as it may, get thee into this tun that thou seest here, and I will open to him, and we shall see what is the occasion of his sudden return this morning. So Gianello forthwith got into the tun, and Perenella went to the door, and let in her husband, and gave him black looks, saying, This is indeed a surprise, that thou art back so soon this morning. By what I see thou hast a mind to make this a holiday, that thou returnest tools in hand. If so, what are we to live on? Whence shall we get bread to eat? Thinkest thou I will let thee pawn my gown and other bits of clothes? Day and night I do naught else but spin, insomuch that the flesh is falling away from my nails, that at least I may have oil enough to keep our lamp alight. Husband, husband, there is never a woman in the neighborhood but marvels and mocks at me, that I am at such labor and pains, and thou comest home with me with thy hands hangling idle, when thou shouldest be at work. Which said, she fell a weeping, and repeating, Alas, alas, woe's me! In what evil hour was I born? In what luckless moment came I hither? I, that might have had so goodly a young man, I would not, to take up with one that bestows never a thought on her whom he made his wife. Other women have a good time with their lovers, and never a one have we here but has two or three. They take their pleasure, and make their husbands believe that the moon is the sun. And I, alas, that I am an honest woman, and have no such casual amours. I suffer, and am hard bested. I know not why I provide not myself with one of these lovers, as others do. Give good heed, husband, to what I say. Were I disposed to dishonour thee, I were at no loss to find the man. For here are gallants enough that love me and court me, and have sent me many an offer of money. No stint, or dresses, or jewels, should I prefer them, but my pride would never suffer it, because I was not born a woman of that sort. And now thou comest home to me when thou oughtest be at work. Whereto the husband said, Wife, wife, for God's sake distress not thyself. Thou shouldest give me credit for knowing what manner of woman thou art, as indeed I have partly seen this morning. True it is that I went out to work, but 'tis plain that thou knowest not, as indeed I knew not, that today is the feast of Saint Galeone, and a holiday, and that is why I have come home at this hour. But nevertheless I have found means to provide us with bread for more than a month, for I have sold to this gentleman, whom you seest with me, the tun thou wottest of, seeing that it has encumbered the house for so long, and he has given me 5 gigalots for it. Quoth then Perenella, And this but adds to my trouble, that our man, and goest abroad, and shouldest know affairs, hast sold for 5 gigalots a ton, which I, that am but a woman, and was scarce ever out of doors, have, for that it took up so much room in the house, sold it for 7 gigalots to a good man, that but now, as thou camest back, got therein to see if it were sound. So hearing, the husband was overjoyed, and said to the man that was come to take it away, Good man, I wish thee Godspeed, for, as thou hearest, my wife has sold the tun for 7 gigalots, whereas thou gavest me only 5. Whereupon, So be it, said the good man, and took himself off. Then Perenella said to her husband, Now, as thou art here, come up and arrange the matter with the good man. Now Gianello, who, meanwhile, had been all on the alert to discover if there were aught he ought to fear or be on his guard against, no sooner heard Perinella's last words than he sprung out of the tun, and feigning to know naught of her husband's return, began thus, Where art thou, good dame? Whereto the husband coming up answered, Here I am, what wouldest thou of me? Quoth Gianello, And who art thou? I would speak with the lady with whom I struck the bargain for this tun. Then said the good man, Have no fear, you can deal with me, for I am her husband. Quoth then Gianello, The tun seems to me sound enough, but I think that you must have let the lees remain in it, for 'tis all encrusted with I know not what that is so dry that I cannot raise in it the nail, wherefore I am not minded to take it unless I first see it scoured. Whereupon Perenella, To be sure, thou shalt not hinder the bargain, my husband will scour it clean. Well and good, said the husband. So he laid down his tools, stripped himself to his vest, sent for a light and a rasp, and was in the tun, scraping away in a trice. Whereupon Perenella, as if she were curious to see what he did, thrust her head into the vent of the tun, which was of no great size, and therewithal one of her arms up to the shoulder, and fell a-saying, Scrape here, and there too, and look, there is a bit left here. So, she being in this posture, directing and admonishing her husband, Gianello, who had not that morning fully satisfied his desire, when the husband arrived, now seeing that as he would, he might not, brought his mind to his circumstances, and resolved to take his pleasure as he might. Wherefore he made up to the lady, who completely blocked the vent of the tun, and even on such wise as on the open champaign the wild and lusty horses do amorously assail the mares of Parthia, he sated his youthful appetite. And so it was that almost at the same moment that he did so, and was off, the tun was scoured, the husband came forth, and Perenella withdrew her head from the vent, and turning to Gianello said, Take this light, good man, and see if it is scoured to thy mind. Whereupon Gianello, looking into the tun, said that it was in good turn, and that he was well content, and paid the husband the 7 gigalots, and caused him to carry the tun to his house. End of Day 7, the second story.
Day 7, the third story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 7, the third story. Fra Rinaldo lies with his gossip. Her husband finds him in the room with her, and they make him believe that he was curing his godson of worms by a charm.
Philostrato knew not how so to veil what he said touching the mayors of Parthia, but that the keen-witted ladies laughed thereat, making as if it was at somewhat else. However, his story being ended, the king called for one from Elisa, who, all obedience, thus began.
Debonair, my ladies, we heard from Emilia how the boogie is exercised, and it brought to my mind a story of another incantation. 'Tis not indeed so good a story as hers, but as no other germane to our theme occurs to me at present, I will relate it. You are to know then that there dwelt aforetime at Siena a young man right gallant and of honourable family, his name Rinaldo, who being in the last degree enamoured of one of his neighbours, a most beautiful gentlewoman and the wife of a rich man, was not without hopes that, if he could but find means to speak with her privately, he might have of her all that he desired. But seeing no way, and the lady being pregnant, he cast about how he might become her child's godfather. Wherefore, having ingratiated himself with her husband, he broached the matter to him in as graceful a manner as he might, and 'twas arranged. So Rinaldo, being now godfather to Madonna Agnesa's child, and having a more colourable pretext for speaking to her, took courage and told her in words that message of his heart which she had long before read in his eyes. But though 'twas not displeasing to the lady to hear, it availed him but little. Now not long afterwards it so befell that, whatever may have been his reason, Rinaldo betook him to friarage, and whether it was that he found good pasture therein, or what not, he persevered in that way of life. And though for a while after he was turned friar he laid aside the love he bore his gossip and certain other vanities, yet in course of time, without putting off the habit, he resumed them, and began to take a pride in his appearance, and to go dressed in fine clothes, and to be quite the trim gallant, and to compose songs and sonnets and ballads, and to sing them, and to make a brave show in all else that pertained to his new character. But why enlarge upon our Fra Rinaldo of whom we speak? What friars are there that do not the like? Ah, opprobrium of a corrupt world! Sleek-faced and sanguine, daintily clad, dainty in all their accessories, they ruffle it shamelessly before the eyes of all, showing, not as doves, but as insolent cocks with raised crest and swelling bosom, and, what is worse, to say naught of the vases full of electuaries and unguents, the boxes packed with divers comfits, the pitchers and phials of artificial waters and oils, the flagons brimming with Malmsey and Greek and other wines of finest quality, with which their cells are so packed that they show not as the cells of friars, but rather as apothecaries' or perfumers' shops. They blush not to be known to be gouty, flattering themselves that other folk wot not that long fasts, and many of them, and coarse fare, and little of it, and sober living, make men lean and thin, and for the most part healthy, or if any malady come thereof, at any rate 'tis not the gout, the wanted remedy for which is chastity, and all beside that belongs to the regimen of a humble friar. They flatter themselves too that others wot not that over and above the meagre diet, long vigils, and orisons, and strict discipline, ought to mortify men and make them pale, and that neither Saint Dominic nor Saint Francis went clad in stuff dyed in grain or any other goodly garb, but in coarse woolen habits, innocent of the dyer's art, made to keep out the cold, and not for show. To which matters 'twere well God had a care, no less than to the souls of the simple folk by whom our friars are nourished. Fray Rinaldo then, being come back to his first affections, took to visiting his gossip very frequently, and gaining confidence, began with more insistence than before to solicit her to that which he craved of her. So, being much urged, the good lady, to whom Fray Rinaldo perhaps seemed now more handsome than of yore, had recourse one day, when she felt herself unusually hard pressed by him, to the common expedient of all that would fain concede what is asked of them, and said, "Oh, but Fray Rinaldo, do friars then do this sort of thing?" "Madam," replied Fray Rinaldo, "when I divest myself of this habit, which I shall do easily enough, you will see that I am a man, furnished as other men, and no friar." Whereto, with a truly comical air, the lady made answer, "Alas, woe's me! You are my child's godfather. How might it be? Nay, but 'twere a very great mischief, and many a time I have heard that 'tis a most heinous sin, and without a doubt, were it not so, I would do as you wish." "If," said Fra Rinaldo, "you forego it for such a scruple as this, you are a fool for your pains. I say not that 'tis no sin, but there is no sin so great but God pardons it, if one repent. Now tell me, whether is more truly father to your son, I that beheld him at the font, or your husband that begot him?" "My husband," replied the lady. "Sooth say you," returned the friar, "and does not your husband lie with you?" "Why, yes," said the lady. "Then," rejoined the friar, "I that am less truly your son's father than your husband, ought also to lie with you, as does your husband." The lady was no logician, and needed little to sway her. She therefore believed, or feigned to believe, that what the friar said was true. So, "Who might avail to answer your words of wisdom?" quoth she, and presently forgot the godfather in the lover, and complied with his desires. Nor had they begun their course to end it forthwith, but under cover of the friar's sponsorship, which set them more at ease, as it rendered them less open to suspicion, they foregathered again and again. But on one of these occasions it so befell that Fray Rinaldo, being come to the lady's house, where he espied none else save a very pretty and dainty little maid that waited on the lady, sent his companion away with her into the pigeon house, there to teach her the paternoster, while he and the lady, holding her little boy by the hand, went into the bedroom, locked themselves in, got them on to a divan that was there, and began to disport them. And while thus they sped the time, it chanced that the father returned, and, before any was aware of him, was at the bedroom door, and knocked, and called the lady by her name. Whereupon, "'Tis as much as my life is worth," quoth Madonna Agnesa. "Lo, here is my husband, and the occasion of our intimacy cannot but be now apparent to him." "Sooth say you," returned Fra Rinaldo, who was undressed, that is to say, had thrown off his habit and hood, and was in his tunic. "If I had but my habit and hood on me in any sort, 'twould be another matter; but if you let him in, and he finds me thus, 'twill not be possible to put any face on it." But with an inspiration as happy as sudden, "Now get them on you," quoth the lady, "and when you have them on, take your godson in your arms, and give good heed to what I shall say to him, that your words may accord with mine, and leave the rest to me." The good man was still knocking, when his wife made answer, "Coming, coming!" And so up she got, and put on a cheerful countenance, and hied her to the door, and opened it, and said, "Husband mine, well indeed was it for us that in came Fra Rinaldo our sponsor. 'Twas God that sent him to us, for in sooth but for that we had today lost our boy. Which the poor simpleton almost swooned to hear, and, How so? quoth he. O husband mine, replied the lady, he was taken but now, all of a sudden, with a fainting fit, so that I thought he was dead, and what to do or say I knew not, had not Fray Rinaldo, our sponsor, come just in the nick of time, and set him on his shoulder, and said, Gossip, 'tis that he has worms in his body, and getting, as they do, about the heart, they might only too readily be the death of him. But fear not, I will say a charm that will kill them all, and before I take my leave you will see your boy as whole as you ever saw him. And because, to say certain of the prayers, thou shouldst have been with us, and the maid knew not where to find thee, he caused his companion to say them at the top of the house, and he and I came in here. And for that 'tis not meet for any but the boy's mother to assist at such a service, that we might not be troubled with any one else, we locked the door, and he yet has him in his arms. And I doubt not that he only waits till his companion have said his prayers, and then the charm will be complete, for the boy is already quite himself again. The good simple soul, taking all this for sooth, and overwrought by the love he bore his son, was entirely without suspicion of the trick his wife was playing him, and heaving a great sigh, said, I will go look for him. Nay, replied the wife, go not, thou wilt spoil the efficacy of the charm. Wait here, I will go see if thou mayst safely go, and will call thee. Whereupon Fray Rinaldo, who had heard all that passed, and was in his canonicals, and quite at his ease, and had the boy in his arms, having made sure that all was as it should be, cried out, Gossip, do I not hear the father's voice out there? Ay, indeed, sir, replied the simpleton. Come in then, said Fray Rinaldo. So in came the simpleton. Whereupon quoth Fray Rinaldo, I restore to you your boy, made whole by the grace of God, whom but now I scarce thought you would see alive at vespers. You will do well to have his image fashioned in wax, not less than life size, and set it for a thanksgiving to God before the statue of Master Saint Ambrose, by whose merits you have this favor of God. The boy, catching sight of his father, ran to him with joyous greetings, as little children are wont, and the father, taking him in his arms, and weeping as if he were restored to him from the grave, fell by turns a kissing him, and thanking his godfather that he had cured him. Fra Rinaldo's companion, who had taught the maid not one paternoster only, but peradventure 4 or more, and by giving her a little purse of white thread that a nun had given him, had made her his devotee, no sooner heard Fra Rinaldo call the simpleton into his wife's room, than he stealthily got him to a place whence he might see and hear what was going on. Observing that the affair was now excellently arranged, he came down and entered the chamber, saying, Fra Rinaldo, those 4 prayers that you bade me say, I have said them all. Then well done, my brother, quoth Fra Rinaldo, well breathed must thou be. For my part, I had but said 2 when my gossip came in. But what with thy travail and mine, God of his grace has vouchsafed us the healing or the boy. The simpleton then had good wine and comfits brought in, and did the honours to the godfather and his companion, in such sort as their occasion did most demand. He then ushered them forth of the house, commending them to God, and without delay had the waxen image made, and directed it to be set up, with the others, in front of the statue of Saint Ambrose, not, be it understood, Saint Ambrose of Milan. End of Day 7, the 3rd story.
Day 7, the 4th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philippa Jevons. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 7, the 4th story. Tophano one night locks his wife out of the house. She, finding that by no entreaties may she prevail upon him to let her in, feigns to throw herself into a well, throwing therein a great stone. Tophano hies him forth out of the house and runs to the spot. She goes into the house and locks him out and hurls abuse at him from within.
The king no sooner wist that Eliza's story was ended, than, turning to Lauretta, he signified his will that she should tell somewhat, wherefore without delay she began.
O love, how great and signal is thy potency! How notable thy stratagems, thy devices! Was there ever, shall there ever be, philosopher or adept, competent to inspire, counsel, and teach in such sort as thou, by thine unpremeditated art, dost tutor those that follow thy lead? Verily laggard teachers are they all in comparison of thee, as by the matters heretofore set forth may very well be understood. To which store I will add, loving ladies, a stratagem used by a woman of quite ordinary understanding, and of such a sort that I know not by whom she could have been taught it, save by love. Know then, that there dwelt aforetime at Arezzo a rich man, Tophano by name, who took to wife Monna Ghita, a lady exceeding fair, of whom, for what cause he knew not, he presently grew jealous. Whereof the lady, being ware, waxed resentful, and having on divers occasions demanded of him the reason of his jealousy, and gotten from him naught precise, but only generalities and trivialities, resolved at last to give him cause enough to die of that evil which without cause he so much dreaded. And being ware that a gallant, whom she deemed well worthy of her, was enamoured of her, she, using due discretion, came to an understanding with him, which being brought to the point that it only remained to give effect to their words in act, the lady cast about to devise how this might be. And witting that, among other bad habits that her husband had, he was too fond of his cups, she would not only commend indulgence, but cunningly and not seldom incite him thereto, insomuch that well nigh as often as she was so minded, she led him to drink to excess, and when she saw that he was well drunken, she would put him to bed, and so not once only, but divers times without any manner of risk, she foregathered with her lover. Nay, presuming upon her husband's intoxication, she grew so bold, that not content with bringing her lover into her house, she would at times go spend a great part of the night with him at his house, which was not far off. Now, such being the enamoured lady's constant practice, it so befell that the dishonoured husband took note that while she egged him on to drink, she herself never drank a drop, whereby he came to suspect the truth, to wit, that the lady was making him drunk, that afterwards she might take her pleasure while he slept. And being minded to put his surmise to the proof, one evening, having drunken naught all day, he mimicked never so drunken a sot, both in speech and in carriage. The lady, deeming him to be really as he appeared, and that 'twas needless to ply him with liquor, presently put him to bed. Which done, she, as she at times was wont, hied her forth to her lover's house, where she tarried until midnight. Tophano no sooner perceived that his wife was gone, than up he got, hied him to the door, locked it, and then posted himself at the window to observe her return, and let her know that he was ware of her misconduct. So there he stood until the lady returned, and finding herself locked out, was annoyed beyond measure, and sought to force the door open. Tophano let her try her strength upon it a while, and then,
"Madam,"
quoth he,
"'tis all to no purpose, thou canst not get in. Go, get thee back thither where thou hast tarried all this while, and rest assured that thou shalt never recross this threshold until I have done thee such honour as is meet for thee in the presence of thy kinsfolk and neighbours."
Thereupon the lady fell entreating him to be pleased to open to her for the love of God, for that she was not come whence he supposed, but had only been passing the time with one of her gossips, because the nights were long, and she could not spend the whole time either in sleep or in solitary watching. But her supplications availed her nothing, for the fool was determined that all Arezzo should know their shame, whereof as yet none wist aught. so as 'twas idle to entreat, the lady assumed a menacing tone, saying,
So thou open not to me, I will make thee the saddest man alive.
Whereto Tophano made answer,
And what then canst thou do?
the lady, her wits sharpened by love, rejoined,
Rather than endure the indignity to which thou wouldst unjustly subject me, I will cast myself into the well hard by here, and when I am found dead there, all the world will believe that 'twas thou that didst it in thy cups, and so thou wilt either have to flee and lose all that thou hadst and be outlawed, or forfeit thy head as guilty of my death, as indeed thou wilt be.
But for all she said, Tophano wavered not a jot in his foolish purpose. So at last,
Lo now,
quoth the lady,
I can no more abide thy surly humour. God forgive thee. I leave thee my distaff here, which be careful to bestow in a safe place.
So saying, away she hied her to the well, and, the night being so dark that wayfarers could scarce see one another as they passed, she took up a huge stone that was by the well, and ejaculating, God forgive me, dropped it therein. Tophano, hearing the mighty splash that the stone made as it struck the water, never doubted that she had cast herself in. So, bucket and rope in hand, he flung himself out of the house and came running to the well to her rescue. The lady had meanwhile hidden herself hard by the door, and seeing him make for the well, was in the house in a trice, and having locked the door, hied her to the window, and greeted him with,
'Tis while thou art drinking, not now when the night is far spent, that thou shouldst temper thy wine with water.
Thus derided, Tophano came back to the door, and finding his ingress barred, began adjuring her to let him in. Whereupon, changing the low tone she had hitherto used for one so shrill that was well nigh a shriek, she broke out with,
By the holy rood, tedious, drunken sot that thou art, thou gettest no admittance here to-night. Thy ways are more than I can endure. 'Tis time I let all the world know what manner of man thou art, and at what hour of the night thou comest home.
Tophano, on his part, now grew angry, and began loudly to upbraid her, insomuch that the neighbours, aroused by the noise, got up, men and women alike, and looked out of the windows and asked what was the matter. Whereupon the lady fell a-weeping, and saying,
'Tis this wicked man, who comes home drunk at even, or falls asleep in some tavern, and then returns at this hour. Long and to no purpose have I borne with him, but 'tis now past endurance, and I have done him this indignity of locking him out of the house, in the hope that perchance it may cause him to mend his ways.
Tophano, on his part, told, dolt that he was, just what had happened, and was mighty menacing. Whereupon,
Now, mark,
quoth the lady to the neighbours,
the sort of man he is. What would you say if I were as he is in the street, and he were in the house as I am? God's faith, I doubt you would believe what he said. Hereby you may gauge his sense. He tells you that I have done just what, I doubt not, he has done himself. He thought to terrify me by throwing I know not what into the well, wherein would to God he had thrown himself indeed, and drowned himself, whereby the wine, of which he has taken more than enough, had been watered to some purpose.
the neighbours, men and women alike, now with one accord gave tongue, censuring Tophano, throwing all the blame upon him, and answering what he alleged against the lady with loud recrimination. And, in short, the brute, passing from neighbour to neighbour, reached at last the ears of the lady's kinsfolk, who hied them to the spot, and being apprised of the fare, from this, that, and the other of the neighbours, laid hands on Tophano, and beat him till he was black and blue from head to foot. Which done, they entered his house, stripped it of all that belonged to the lady, and took her home with them, bidding Tophano look for worse to come. Thus hard bested, and ruing the plight in which his jealousy had landed him, Tophano, who loved his wife with all his heart, set some friends to work to patch matters up, whereby he did, in fact, induce his lady to forgive him and live with him again, albeit he was fain to promise her never again to be jealous, and to give her leave to amuse herself to her heart's content, provided she use such discretion that he should not be ware of it. On such wise, like the churl and booby that he was, being despoiled, he made terms. Now long live love, and perish war and all that wage it. End of Day 7, the 4th story.